Unleash your potential. EPOS, the power of audio.
Hello and welcome to the Fast Company Innovation Forum. I'm Abigail Bassett, and I want to thank you so much for joining us for this panel in partnership with EPOS. We just had a sample of exactly what fantastic audio sounds like. And in case we haven't all sort of understood what bad audio sounds like, I'd like to just play a clip very briefly to give you a refresher.
Nice to see you all. Did everyone receive my email with the contact report?
Yep.
How many of us have had that experience in our current lives? It's just part of normal life today. So whether we're dealing with barking dogs, kids running around in the background, our partners working in the other room, whatever the case may be, our audio affects our ability to live and work in a space that's comfortable. Joining me today from all over the world is Joel Beckerman. He's a composer and founder of Man-Made Music and the co-author of Sonic Boom. We're also joined by Dr. Erica Walker. She's the founder of the Community Noise Lab at Boston University School of Public Health. And finally, we're joined by Jesper Koch, Vice President of Research and Development at EPOS. I'd like to thank you all for joining me. And before we get into questions, I want to remind all of our viewers that we're currently live. So if you'd like to ask a question of our panelists, please be sure to drop your questions into the Q&A bar, and we'll get to them in about 10 minutes towards the end of our panel. So, Dr. Walker, I'd like to talk to you first. Let's talk a little bit about the impact that audio, especially bad audio, can have on our wellness, on our health and well-being.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that. I don't know if you guys can hear it in the background, but there's some construction going on outside. So there's this like thumping in the background. So it's something that affects us all, even in sort of these professional settings as well. Erica, as we look ahead, right, as we move through sort of this phase of working from home and teaching our kids from home, as a researcher, what do you think the future of audio holds for us in terms of what do we need to, looking down the road, what do we need to invest in? What do we need to think about, especially as we work with our kids to ensure that they're getting the best education outcomes that is possible?
I think that we need to just work on making sure that there's an equitable distribution of any technology that makes our lives better, especially when it comes to the audio experience.
Hello, and welcome to Fast Company's Innovation Festival. I'm Abigail Bassett, and I'm so glad to have you here to see this panel today in partnership with Booz Allen Hamilton. Space is truly the final frontier. It challenges us physically, mentally, and technologically. But the space race has significantly changed in the last few years with new players, new private companies, and new innovations across the board. Most of the space program, however, is largely focused on resources here on Earth. Today, we're joined by General Kevin Chilton. He's the commander of Air Force Space Command and a former astronaut. I'm also joined by Michelle DiGiuseppe, the acting deputy director of Systems Engineering and Integration for Advanced Exploration at NASA. Finally, I'm joined by Andrea Insera. She's the executive vice president of aerospace at Booz Allen Hamilton. And Michelle, with your work at NASA, what are you guys focused on? Sort of what's the goal that we're moving towards in this new era of this different space race?
So one of the things that we're doing at NASA is we've established the Artemis program. We have Artemis 1 and 2. Artemis is set to go next November 2021.
Andrea, as you work with partners, how do you guys approach sort of the balance between the typical government military sort of aspect of space and the private sector? You know, how do you balance sort of those needs and those different pressures to be successful in space?
Yeah, as Kevin mentioned, there are different goals, right? And but there are some common goals.
And so it grows the economy that way. So that's another benefit from a federal perspective.
And Andrea, I wanted to go back to you talking a little bit more about sort of the data and the information that we're getting down from our exploration of space. Thinking about it from sort of the management and storage and security of that data as we, share what we can or share, what will be most advantageous for the continued exploration, for the continued scientific expansion of our world. How do you guys think about sort of the management of that data from an actual day-to-day point of view?
Yeah, no, Abigail, I think it's a tremendous question.
Hello, and welcome to the Fast Company Innovation Festival. My name is Abigail Bassett, and I want to thank you for joining our panel discussion in partnership with Booz Allen Hamilton. In today's world, we're constantly connected, whether we're trying to navigate our way through traffic using our semi-autonomous vehicles, making a secure financial movement on the market, or connecting with our doctors in a virtual environment. All of our information is accessible and online, but with that connection comes a vulnerability of our own cybersecurity. So joining me today to talk about the future of cybersecurity, I have three fantastic panelists. My first panelist is Kelly Rosomalski. She is the Secure Connected Health Director at Booz Allen Hamilton. We're also joined by Kevin Tierney, the Vice President of Cybersecurity at GM. Finally, we have Alyssa Abdullah, who goes by Dr. J. She's the Senior Vice President and Deputy Chief Officer at MasterCard, and she spent some time as a CIO during the Obama administration. So, Dr. J, I'd like to toss the first question to you. What are some of the biggest advantages and challenges that we face at the intersection of cybersecurity and technologies in the current era?
We're seeing in my space the economic impact of cybercrime and card fraud reaching $5.6 trillion within the next 5 years. $5.6 trillion. That is an enormous amount of fraud and crime. And that's because everything is so connected.
As we move into sort of the physical realm, the physical safety, the physical impacts of cybersecurity, Kelly, I'm curious, especially as we talk about healthcare, what sort of impacts the intersection of information and the security of that information has on what you work on?
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with Kevin and Dr. J. Today, everything's more connected, right? Most devices are talking to one another.
To make sure we're fighting those vulnerabilities, to make sure we know what the adversary is doing, to make sure we are increasing, the amount of protections that we have on our own systems, networks, and processes.
And I think a lot of people, when they think about cybersecurity or they think about sort of, the terrible things that can happen when something gets hacked, say, we have these horrible sci-fi stories about AI taking over and all these things. I'm curious, from your perspective, what are some of the misconceptions that the public has about cybersecurity and where our vulnerabilities are?
I think people think cybersecurity is hard, and there's some parts of it that we have to handle in the background that's hard, but there's simple things that we can do, and we'll tease some of that out today in our panel.